Welcome to Awards Heaven podcast, everybody. I have a really special guest with me today, and that is, of course, the Oscar-winning sound genius, Johnnie Burn, here to talk about various things. But what I wanted to say first up, everyone, is that this award season has been fascinating because I've spoken with multiple sound teams on completely different films, and Johnny's work on the Zone of Interest keeps coming up. John, you expanded the vocabulary of what sound can do in storytelling. And then you turn around and you deliver Hamnet and Bugonia in the same window, which could not be more different, but both feel unmistakably authored as something that I feel like, is that a Johnny Byrne movie? And it is. And I just wanted to know first up, what, when you think back of winning an Oscar, what first comes to mind in terms of your best memory of that time?
Oh, I mean, uh, of actually winning, it was just extraordinary walking down in, the Dolby Theatre to the podium and seeing all these like not just heroes, but the entire Hollywood elite as I saw it. But anyway, basically all standing up and clapping and yeah, I was kind of flabbergasted. I certainly didn't think that we were going to win that evening. And and a few months before that, I had no idea that it would even be of interest to the Academy. It was, I thought we played it in the Cannes Film Festival, like whatever that was, 10 months before. And I thought, oh, yeah, good. People liked it. That's good. That's the end of that then. And, but it was, yeah, it was a remarkable film for sound. And I think, that obviously begins in the script, doesn't it? And Jonathan Glazer is an extraordinary director who really understands that if you tell people one thing with the picture and another thing with the sound, then you leave an awful lot of room for keeping people engaged with their brain, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you can really haunt someone, like this film did. That was my number one film of that year. And I have to admit, many of us at Gold Derby, where I still work, predicted that you were going to win. We just knew that this is undeniable. You have to win this.
Yeah.
It's even though the Oscars love to reward the loudest film or the musical, every so often a film like that cuts on a deeper psychological level actually breaks through. It's almost a miracle. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it was obviously in making the film, we did think about it as two different films. One is the thing that you were looking at, and the other one was the film you don't see, basically. And so yeah, it was definitely a film that used sound, certainly more than anything else that I have. But yeah, no, honestly, I was absolutely sure that Richard King was going to go up for his, nuclear Oppenheimer, and
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. But it was amazing, to sit there with my family and my kids, got to go to the Oscars, and Dad actually
Wow.
won. It was extraordinary.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. That is so cool. The sound in the zone of interest really does get under your skin. It's oppressive and haunting. And half the time, on my first watch, I didn't even realize what's going on. But something was going on because I was feeling very disturbed whilst watching just random family walking around their house. So, was that subconscious impact part of your intention from the get-go? Or did the emotional weight of the sound emerge naturally as you were building the film?
Um, it definitely emerged as we built it. I mean, when John handed me the script, which was 3 years before that point or something, he said, "Look, I haven't written anything on this in the script regarding this, but what you should know is that the cameras are never going to go in the camp, and we're going to do it all through sound. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but you need to become an expert on what things sounded like in Auschwitz in 1943, and then when I come back from filming it, we're gonna need to sit there and put the sounds that you've decided are period appropriate and put them on the cam." And I thought, holy cow, how do I figure, and so that was led to an enormous amount of research and building of a library so that I was ready. And then we actually went through the whole of, we did about 9 months of post production where we didn't even consider the sound of the camp. We just constructed the kind of family drama of the people in the house, did the picture edit, did a full sound mix, and put that together. And then it was only then that because we didn't want the sound of the camp to inform the people in the house, because if we were starting to make picture edits or anything based on that, then it might that's breaking the whole premise of the film. They're not listening, basically. This is a long answer to your question, but yeah. So it was only then, once we had the kind of the film of people going about their house ignoring it, that we started putting sounds on, and then it would be okay. She's standing in the bedroom with looking at her new fur coat. What would be happening at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning? And I would go to my research and look, and we would try putting things on. But I think what really forced the whole juxtaposition considerably, or what really made the film soundscape gel, was when we introduced the kind of constant um, low rumble of the camp, and how that worked as a way for you as a viewer to not be able to escape the horrific notion that it's constantly going on right there. And that was something that came through about halfway through this sort of sound post-production thing, when we
Yeah.
did a screening and the production designer said to me afterwards, God, it sounds a bit like a country park still. I thought, remember all the research we did, and I was showing you how, millions of people were here, and it needs to sound more industrious. And I took that comment back to Jonathan when we were back in the sound editing room, and he said, "Oh, that rumble you made for the crematoria, why don't you try putting that across the whole film?" And I thought, wow, what a great idea.
Right.
So
Wow.
so yeah, it was, and that allowed us to then go back and remove so many of the other incidences. We had an awful lot more human sounds of pain, gunshots and dogs and everything, but we found we didn't need quite so much of it. So the process of understanding how to attenuate exactly, the narrative and, more to the point, the emotional journey, was something that Jonathan and I sort of discovered. And that's, throughout the process of post-production. And that's very much how Jonathan Glazer films are made. You spend a long time in an edit, in picture and sound, working out what the best way to tell this particular scene is, basically, and how the arc of
Yeah.
the film works. Because he's not one to storyboard it and then go and shoot a take of each one of those and then cobble it together in 3 months. His,
Yeah.
Under the Skin was like 2 years in post or something, and then this one was about the same or something. Yeah.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It kind of makes sense. His films are so special. Under the Skin, my God, it's another classic and masterpiece. But what really impressed me with Zone of Interest, to be honest, is the film plays with the way the human ear adapts to repeated noise. I find, like, how did you decide how far to push some of that stuff before it crosses into the line of being numbing rather than meaningful? Like, you just picked the right amount, I think.
It's really funny you say that, because it's such a weird phenomenon. The brain does dial it out, and when we were got to the final mix, and we're on the mixing stage playing things very loud in a room exactly at cinema level, we had this experience where we came in sort of in the morning, halfway through the week, and we were about halfway through the film, and cup of tea, how are you, good morning, right, let's play where we were last night. And I was like, goodness me, I think, so what's going on? It was all too loud. We had this like, wow, what have we done? There's a mistake. Something's playing, 8 dB too loud. And obviously it wasn't that. It was, we learned that in order to mix the film correctly, we had to start at the beginning of the film and press play, and then play down to where we wanted to be that day. So, towards the end of the mix, we were watching the film for an hour before we got to the bit we were going to work on that day. Because, yeah, exactly as you say, you become immune to it, just as the Hoss family did themselves, but for other reasons. You do start to dial these sounds out, and so which was really interesting, because it kind of, the fact that that was happening made us think, oh, we've probably got it right then. This is so, to then have sound that an hour and 20 minutes in, you're still registering. They definitely had to be louder, and they had to be brighter and more out of context, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I just found that I didn't notice it to begin with, really, but then it started becoming quite apparent, and I felt like it must have been intentional. That otherwise, I just would. It just, yeah, you just zone it out, you drown it out. That's what we all
Yeah.
do. Let's move on to Hamnet, because there's so much to say about your work on Hamnet. I watched it again last night out of interest. I just wanted to watch it. It's the third time now. Still had tears at the end. It's this is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. And in Hamnet, I noticed, because I was thinking about this interview, that we feel danger before sometimes we see it. And I'm wondering if you use sound as like a sixth sense, a way to let us feel what Agnes was fearing before she consciously registered what was going to start happening to her family. I know that's a weird question, but surely I think the sound does something there because that's how I was feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the sound is foreshadowing there, and um, the natural sound from the film shoot was beautiful and wonderful. So much of it, particularly in that early part of the film, was from a forest. Did have quite a few aeroplanes flying over it, so we had some editing to do. Um, but yeah, there is a whole other layer of sound that is augmented and and that's a very careful use of natural sound that is at times heightened or enhanced, and particularly enhanced in certain harmonic frequencies that will provide more of an emotional steer, and that enhancement happens gradually and hopefully subtly and not too obvious to the viewer, but yeah, absolutely. We were painting this as the child of a forest witch and someone who's very in tune with the forest, and a great way to do that is to use the natural environment and make it slightly become more aware, or more, or you basically lean on the story beats in a way that
Yeah.
my mother wouldn't have understood, basically.
Exactly right. And similarly, like when the entire point of a film, or one of the emotional themes of the film is internalized grief, melancholy, fear, whatever it may be, how do you steer clear of over designing? Because that's another thing that can happen on quiet films where it's so obvious that they're doing it.
Um, Fortunately, I have Chloe Zhao to stop me from going too far with anything. But we were everything that went in was carefully designed. The bird songs, any bird tweet was specifically authored to have an iambic pentameter about it in order to suggest that the rhythms of the forest are something that William Shakespeare would have picked up on, and but also its tone and sort of emotional steer would have been vetted and audited. And so basically, I met with Chloe once or twice a week, depending on the kind of workload, and for a few hours, and would play her where I was at with specific scenes, and we would watch them through. And the minute anything became too obvious, she'd put her hand up, and she was sitting in front of me in my kind of screening room, and I would make a note and know that that had become too obvious. So, but it is a very when you're trying to make natural sound do something, it's a very fine line, because if you become aware of it, you've sort of blown the idea for the rest of the film.
Exactly, and we can't have that at all. So then the ending of Hamnet lands with this like incredible emotional rush. A huge part of that is how I think the mix opens up for Max Richter's beautiful score to surge in. A composer recently told me that moments like that only really work if the sound design sets the runway. So how did you and Max build that final release together? And what choices in the soundscape made that payoff hit as deeply as it actually really does?
Yeah, I mean, it's something actually Max and I discussed right in our very first Zoom call before filming even began, kind of thing. And um, I was telling him that I love to foreshadow the incoming score within the environment, because the choice of when to start music and when to stop music is one of the most powerful choices that a film director can make, or a composer. But um, and um, and I think in a film like Hamnet of great subtlety, the more you can sort of blur that moment or make it land less heavily, the more you keep people in the world, and then can subtly take them on the journey that the music's supposed to be doing, without saying, "Whoa, here comes the music." So is what I was doing in that particular scene was taking the root note of Max's music, the tonic, the key that it's in, and making the ambience before it resonate at that frequency, so that the film seems to say that the music sort of comes out of the ether, kind of thing, to some degree. and it's not a very obvious thing that's going on, but it just makes it just softens the incoming of the music, and then really it's all about using the sound design against the music to suggest when you do want to be present in the arena with them, or more subjectively within the character's head via the kind of removal and absence of all other sound. And at that point, when you mix wise go directly into the music, you sort of go more directly into, well, Agnes's head in that case. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, clever mixing with a bit of sound design.
Yeah, it happens just at the right point. I was thinking if Chloe Zhao had but found a maybe slightly different point, maybe it wouldn't have hit the same, but it just does, and it's just one of the best endings of a film I've seen in such a long time.
No,
Really,
isn't it?
really,
Because
really
I
well
was,
used.
yeah, when I saw that, I was just thrilled. I mean, because ending of films, so many films get it wrong, don't they? They can be brilliant the whole way through,
Yep.
and then you're like, why did you do that at the ending? I was like, Chloe Zhao, man, you stuck that landing. That is really good.
Uh, she's
Her
a
and
master.
Fonzie, the editor, and
Yes,
Maggie, the
exactly.
writer. Yeah, and
So
so much
sick.
of that was kind of, the hands thing was something that was came out of the film shoot, as
Oh,
a realization from Chloe that she needed to have something poignant but non-verbal at that point. So it was a sort of a reactionary part of the exploration of the shoot, rather than a particularly scripted moment.
it also reminded me, like when Noah Jupe is reciting some of those most famous words from Hamlet, how every line of that play has just hit our pop culture in some way,
Oh,
shape, or form. It's just incredible. It's an incredible
yeah,
movie. Um,
yeah, it
so
really is.
when you're thinking of we think about pre-threat tension, which I think sound plays a big part of. It works very differently in Hamnet than it does in Begonia, because in Hamnet, it's interior, it's intuitive. In Begonia, I feel like it's a bit more external and escalating. So how does your approach shift when the fear lives inside a character versus when it fills the environment around them when they've been taken hostage, basically?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Begonia is so much fun for sound. And, Yorgos is a wonderful collaborator. He's, like, no, initially I would try to show him loads and loads of ideas, and he really forced me. He was the guy who really forced me to realize that I had to completely understand a film and what the film was trying to achieve, before I could get going on the sound design. Previously, I'd abdicate sort of many important decisions unconsciously, but to the director by showing them, like, here's three different ways of doing this, and he was like, "No, you're the sound guy. You figure it out. I've hired you." But anyway, so understanding how Begonia worked was kind of a great conceptual thing, and and for a lot of the time you are in Jesse's character's Teddy's head, and you
Yeah.
are, when he's cycling around town, and all the environmental sounds that you hear that he's hearing are from a subjective point of view of his kind of paranoid belief that the world is full of aliens, and cars sound a bit like spaceships, and so there's a very subtle Teddy's perspective going on when you're not kind of in the basement and before the capture. And Michelle's world, Emma Stone's character, her in the office, is very much less of a subjective thing, but it's more of a filmic characterization of her personality and her take on the world, which is a way more clinical and fastidiously clean environment, and with a pace and a clip to it. Um, and yeah, and then she's captured, and then you're in the basement, and that is, this hideously claustrophobic environment where the background soundscape is used subtly but quite comprehensively to kind of follow the narrative energy and emotion, I suppose, of the scene and where it's going, and that's done by using sort of shifting tones of what seemingly is a house, a basement in a house in the country, but is also, his kind of experimentation lab, the boiling pot of all Teddy's paranoias, and and yeah, and that was tricky because the camera was really noisy.
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't. Um, You know what's really fascinating to me is that some of the most innovative moments in Begonia use sound at the edge of perception. It's kind of similar, maybe analogous to what we're talking about with Zone. Those low frequency murmurs, harmonic cues, we feel them more than hear them. And so I'm just wondering, was there a moment when you used sub-perceptual sound to hint at something and the audience maybe wasn't consciously meant to notice yet, given what end up finding out towards the end of the film?
Yeah, very much. And I think yeah, when I worked with Jordan Peele about um a month into working, he said, "Oh, yeah, I just watched some of the work you've done, and I get it what you do now. You're doing painting subjectivity in a really subtle way." Um, yeah, so it's very much what I try and do in any film. Is I think the whole non-musical sound environment, sound world of a film is a huge um, it's a huge canvas in which you can paint all sorts of things. The choice of of a background ambience or a car going past, or or birds or bees or anything can be any one of a million things, and each one of those sounds can have a particular psychological impact on you, depending on the way you sort of play it. So yeah, very much. In the basement, we are, suggesting sci-fi. I won't lie. When Yorgos told me, "Oh, we're doing a sci-fi movie," I got very excited and thought it was actually going to
Mm.
be like a set in space movie.
No.
So I probably put a few more sounds in that I wanted to use. But yeah, um, the for example, the when Don pulls the gun to his own head, for the few minutes before that, the soundscape is starting to rupture somewhat, and very much reflecting what's going on in his head, and the dichotomy between him, who he chooses to believe, and and his eventual breakdown, sort of thing. So yeah, I think you can very have a lot of fun leading people, and also because with pictures, an image goes in through your brain and it goes to your prefrontal cortex, and you process it, and that takes like about 100 or so milliseconds, whereas the sound
Yeah.
goes straight into your ear, and you just react to it in about 20 milliseconds, which is there is no time for thoughts with sound. So in that, I think you believe it slightly more honestly on a subconscious level. So it's interesting to use the sound. I think those are the reasons, like, why if picture cuts out or picture gets interference, it's not as annoying as it is if the sound of a film or something you're watching, if that becomes interfered with, or staticky or whatever, then I think that's much more annoying for a viewer, because it's the bit that you sort of rely on for your emotional, that's the bit you
Yeah.
believe, because
It's
you're
the bit you
just reacting
believe.
to it, not processing it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so true. You've worked with so many amazing directors like Peel and Joe and obviously Lanthimos. Do you prefer a director who has a real sonic blueprint already in their head, or do you like being the person who defines the rules of the sound world of a film?
I think to some degree, a director has to have their own blueprint, or they're not going to be using sound in the first place, because great sound design really does start in the script. And um but but having said that, there are plenty of directors who aren't really even aware of the power of sound, and how you can, because they might see a film more as, if they come from a theatrical background, perhaps, then they're going to see it more as a way to just put actors' performances on screen with some lovely music, rather than so. Yeah, definitely just directors who are open to the use of sound. But I think if they've got to be considering it at their conceptual stage of the film, because sound design as a sort of as an adornment to a fait accompli, lacks will often lack a crucial ingredient. Anything in a film has to have form and function, and the form of it, the style of it, the way in which is presented needs to be as a result of its function, of its essential purpose in the film. Because if you're just putting things in because you think that they sound nice, and they don't have a purpose, then it becomes awfully tiresome for an audience, because it's sort of meaningless style, rather than something that's essentially part of the fabric of the film. And that's the way to have good sound design, is have it baked in conceptually, and then work out how you're going to do it stylistically because of the demands upon its use in the film. I don't know if any of
Yeah.
that made sense.
It does, definitely does. It's so complicated. I wish more people were aware of what film sound is all about. I've Once I started learning about it over the last few years, I can just see that I had no idea at all, and it was all really. I mean, that's fine. A lot of people just want to see a movie and eat the popcorn and leave, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I find it so fascinating the amount of emotional. How much control you really have over the emotions of the film that people probably don't quite realize at all.
No, you really do. You really do. I mean, I think Zone of Interest did open people's eyes because, all sorts of people have said, wow, you've helped redefine for people how sound gets used. And I know that, um, I'm now starting to meet directors who are in the cycle of time long enough that they've gone and thought about the Zone of Interest and written their new screenplay and had that opportunity to include these new thoughts. But it takes a while for it all to percolate down. But yeah,
Yeah,
bring it on.
yeah.
Filmmaking with sound.
Bring it on.
I think the problem with sound is you go to a film set and if it's you probably 97% of everyone there is worrying about what things look like and the picture.
That's
And then
right.
you'll have a few guys, two or three guys or girls, and we're doing the sound. We care about the sound. And in that they're a small voice, and also it's cheap, compared to capturing an image. Sound is way cost less, and so in
Mm.
that it seems like people underestimate its power of being 50% of the entire experience. I think if sound costs like $100 million to record a single, a minute of sound, if for some reason that was the equation, then people would be like, wow, we're going to watch this amazing, films would be
Yeah,
focused on how they sounded, not what they look
listening
like.
to them. Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's why it's really sometimes hard to know whether it was the production sound mixer who was doing the heavy lifting. Was it the designer at the outset? Was it the re-recording mixer? Was it the editors? Was it the Foley, the ADR? Like it's
yeah.
everything, obviously, and every film's different. But speaking of Zone, coming back to that before we say goodbye, when I spoke to several of the sound teams over the last few months, we all reference Zone of Interest as the benchmark. How does it make you feel when you know that there are so many of your peers and colleagues really respect your work and are really happy that you won the Oscar that year?
Oh, I mean, it's immensely rewarding to know that. I think the the overwhelming the overwhelming good thing about that is, we've as a team of sound people, we now have a bit more to talk about, and I'm very proud to be the vanguard of that. But essentially, it's because Jonathan Glazer is an extraordinary director who knows how to use sound, and he gave us this opportunity, and I can help spread the word of that. I did a talk with Mark Kermode, the critic, and Walter Murch. And and as we were walking off stage, Walter Murch said to me, "Do you enjoy talking about the zone of interest?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "Good, because you'll be doing it for the rest of your life." I
That's so
was
true.
like, "Yeah, but so yeah, to be the protector of, or to be able to push that, and on behalf of my personal sound team and the guys that I work with, and also the wider industry. Yeah, I think it's wonderful that Jonathan Glazer gave us that opportunity. Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, on that note, thank you for your time today. Congratulations on some really
Thank you,
stunning work
Bob.
on Hamnet and Bugonia. Hopefully, we could catch up again soon.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. Enjoy your evening.